Many years ago, British Telecom ran a series of television advertisements designed to encourage their customers to make more calls. They featured the actress Maureen Lipman playing an archetypal Jewish grandmother named Beatty. In one advert, she has called her grandson to see how he has done in his school exams.
Hello?
Anthony? Oh, congratulations on your exam results.
Grandma, I failed.
You failed? What do you mean you failed?
I failed. Maths, English, physics, geography, German, woodwork, art. I failed.
You didn't pass anything?
Sociology.
An ology? It gets an ology and it says it's failed. You get an ology, you're a scientist.
So, we all need as many ologies as we can get. But what is an ology? There are lots of them. Sociology, archaeology, theology, and so on. All ologies come from the Greek word logoi, words. The singular word is logos. So an ology means words about or words on whatever the prefix is. Sociology, words about society. This rather ugly word is a mixture of Latin and Greek. The Latin socius, friend, companion, associate, is joined to the Greek logoi, words to give sociology, words about society. Most other examples come entirely from the Greek. So archaeology, words about beginnings, from archi, beginning. Theology, words about God, from theos, God. Etymology, words about the origins of words, from the Greek etymos, true, and so on. And so what, perhaps you are asking? Why am I spending this time talking about ologies? The technical word here is jargon, the words used by those on the inside but may inadvertently exclude outsiders. Two doctors discussing a patient will use jargon, technical terms that they understand but which might exclude the patient. So in your studies you will hear and use jargon, but in your preaching and teaching you must not use it, or at least not without explanation. We use jargon for clarity. If both the speaker and the listener understand the jargon, then communication has occurred. As you continue your studies, you will be learning a new vocabulary, much of it Greek. Try to transfer these skills. Having been told that archaeology is the study of beginnings, that logos means word, and theos, God, you may be able to identify this verse from the New Testament in Greek. En arche in hologos, kai hologos in proston theon, kai theos in hologos. En beginning in hoc word, kai hoc word in proston God, kai God in hoc word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So, you have made a start on your Greek vocabulary. But back to the subject, a different ology, chronology, words about chronos, time. You may have heard of a chronometer, an old word for a machine that measures or meters time. A clock. If we are to study the Bible, we need to study time. The Bible is full of time. From the moment when God started his great act of creation in the beginning, we are travelling in time. And if we are to have any sort of intelligent conception of the story of the Bible, we need the framework that only chronology gives us. Also, we need to consider another word that we have borrowed from the Greeks, historia, a record of the past. And the study of how we uncover and record the past is historiography. Graphies, like ologies, come from the Greek. Grapho means I write. So, geography is writing about the G, the earth. And geology is words about the G. and in English the two words have grown in different directions. So geography is the study of the world, and specifically the human world, and geology is the study of the physical composition of the world, the rocks and so forth. But I digress. Back to history and chronology. Most people think of dates when they start to study history, and you will need to learn at least some key dates as you progress. But first we need to think about how we measure and record time. The Bible covers a great deal of time, from the creation of the world through to the promises concerning the time when time will be no more, the end of the world, both of which are difficult to date. James Ussher, an Irish bishop, calculated that the world was created in 4004 BC. He did this by using the genealogies in the Old Testament and calculating back, a method that is not without problems, but we will not address these just now, other than to note that when the Jewish rabbi Hillel II did the same thing, his calculations led him to believe that the Anno Mundi, the year of creation, was 3761 BC. What we do need to look at now are those two letters that I use so casually, BC. We take our AD BC system for granted, but it is under attack. AD is an abbreviation for the Latin phrase Anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. Every time we use AD, we are proclaiming that the year in which our Lord was born was significant. But some of those who do not know Jesus as Lord do not want to proclaim this fact. It is too late to change our starting point, but some now use CE and BCE as politically correct synonyms for AD and BC. CE stands for Common Era or Christian Era, and BCE for Before the Common Era or Before the Christian Era. Personally, I find these expressions distasteful, and I will continue to name Jesus as Dominus, as Lord, whenever I can. I would rather be theologically correct than politically correct. You must decide for yourself, but be aware of these abbreviations when you meet them in your reading. You have already noticed that the Bible travels from a long way BC, in Genesis 1, through to beyond the life of our Lord. New Testament history closes with Paul under house arrest and awaiting trial in Rome. This would be in the mid to late 60s AD. So the Bible crosses the BC AD gap. In the Old Testament we count backwards, from 4004 BC, or whenever creation occurred, towards the year naught, although there was no year zero. Had the BC AD system been invented before Jesus was born, impossible if you think about it, we would have gone from 1 BC to AD 1. But the Old Testament story finishes long before the birth of Jesus. Probably the last event recorded in the Old Testament history books was the rededication of the walls of Jerusalem under the leadership of Nehemiah. This was in about the year 425 BC. And then nothing more is recorded in the Bible until the birth of Jesus. Wrong. Read carefully. In Luke's Gospel, we meet an old couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth, and we read how they finally had a baby, whom they named John. And then Mary enters our story. All of which occurred around the year 4, 5 or even 6 BC. Pardon? How could Jesus be conceived several years BC? To answer this question we need to go back to Rome in the 6th century. A monk by the name of Dionysius Exiguus had been commissioned to calculate the year in which Jesus was crucified, so as to be able to confirm the date of Easter. To do this, Dionysius used the system currently in use in Rome. The Romans had counted their years from Anno Urbis Conditei, in the year of the founded city, or Ab Urbi Condita, since the founding of the city, both abbreviated AUC. The city is, of course, Rome, and by our reckoning it was founded in 753 BC. However, Dionysius miscalculated. We know from Matthew's Gospel that Jesus was born while Herod the Great was king of the Jews. And we now know that Herod died, according to our dating system, several years BC. By the time the error had been noticed, it was too late to change. It is easier to have John the Baptizer and his cousin Jesus born before the end of the last century BC than to rewrite all the other dates that have occurred ever since. So when we look back at the life of Jesus, we have to remember to add 4 or 5 years to the AD date to see the age of Jesus at that time. So if we say that he was crucified in AD 33, he was 37 or 38 years old, or thereabouts. Another topic you will examine in detail. So, the Bible story travels from the dawn of time through until the 1st century AD. All of the Old Testament is BC. Can we find any dates? Better scholars than I have attempted to fix a date for the creation. One obvious problem here is the Garden of Eden. How long did Adam and Eve live in sinless perfection in the garden? Human nature being what it is, I would guess at about 20 minutes. But perhaps, and I can neither prove nor disprove this, perhaps they lived there for thousands of years. Genesis does not tell us. Then there is the theory of apparent age. If we travelled back in time and visited Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, we would see 2 adults, even on the day after they were made. When they reached their first birthday, they looked much older than 1 year. And the plants in the garden were mature enough to bear fruit from the day they were first made. If Adam had chopped down a tree, presumably he could have counted many years of growth rings inside, even though the tree had been growing for no more than a day. Adam and Eve probably had belly buttons, even though they were never connected to a mother's womb. Neither of them had mothers, or mothers-in-law, but we'll let that pass. So if we were right with this theory, and it cannot be proved, the earth appears to be much older than it really is. And any surviving evidence for the first days of humanity was destroyed in the Great Flood, except for the memories carried by those who survived. As ever, this is something for you to note for now and look at in much more detail in the appropriate courses. If we are looking for certain dates, we are going to have to go beyond Genesis. Although there is a great deal of history within Genesis, it is much closer to folk tale in how it is told than a modern Western history book. This is not a criticism, merely an observation. It is unrealistic to expect an ancient writer to give us modern history. It is chronological snobbery to believe that we invariably know more about things than our ancestors, and that our way of doing things is always best. Or, to put it more bluntly, that Moses did not know what he was talking about when he wrote Genesis. The fact that we are studying Genesis today, in the 21st century, should tell us that Moses got something right. When it comes to finding dates, we need to look at the stars. Some more Greek for you. Ologies are from logoi, words. Graphies are from grapho, I write. And now the new one, Nomies, from nomoi, laws. Today we distinguish between astronomy and astrology. Astronomy deals with the laws of the stars and planets. It is a scientific discipline and can be studied academically. Astrology deals with guidance or words from the stars, horoscopes and the like. It is not recognised as an academic discipline, at least not yet. But in the ancient world no such distinction was made. The stars were observed with a great deal of care and the results recorded very accurately, so that those who watched the stars would have knowledge of what was happening in the world. I do not know how they did it, and I suspect that much of what was predicted was so vague as to be open to all sorts of interpretations. And then we read in Matthew chapter 2 that wise men from the east saw from the stars that a new king of the Jews had been born. So they got that one right. The stars and planets are reliable. They go where we expect and at a time we expect. Halley's Comet is reliable. Every 76 years it swings around the sun close enough for us to see it. And it has done so for thousands of years, as seen on the 11th century Bayeux tapestry. So, when an ancient observer records a comet, an eclipse or a conjunction, a modern astronomer can often calculate what it was and when it happened. This gives us our chronological anchor point, although there is still much more to be done. The great astronomers of the ancient world were found in Mesopotamia. That's Greek again, between the rivers being the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, and later the Persians looked up and wrote down what they saw, but only rarely do they mention the people of Israel. Although the Jews are central to the Bible and thus to our Bible study, they were an insignificant people in world terms, and so of little or no interest to their powerful neighbours. But by using the surviving records from the Mesopotamian civilizations, we can construct a reliable chronology for Assyria, Babylon and Persia. And when the Hebrews enter the record, we can fix a date. And from these few dates, we can use the chronological material in the Old Testament to calculate some definite dates and fill in the rest. The key Hebrew dates given within the Old Testament text are as follows. 1. The length of time Jacob's descendants spent in Egypt, given in Genesis 15:13 and Exodus 12:40 and 41. Genesis 15 warns that the Hebrews would be oppressed in Egypt for 400 years. Exodus 12 gives the total time in Egypt as 430 years. So presumably they were there for 430 years, but not oppressed for all of that time. 2. Numbers 14:33 tells us that the Hebrews spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness after the Exodus and before entering the Promised Land. If only Moses had seen fit to record the name of the Pharaoh who opposed God's will, we would be on much firmer chronological ground, as we could then access the Egyptian records. 3. 1 Kings 6:1 tells us that there were 480 years between the Exodus and the building of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem in the 4th year of his reign. When we use Assyrian king lists and historical texts, we can fix a date for the Battle of Karkar on the river Orontes. In this great battle, Shalmaneser III fought against an alliance of 12 kings, including King Ahab of Israel. The date is 853 BC, and so gives us a date of death for Ahab and the date of the commencement of the reign of his successor, King Ahaziah. The Neo-Babylonian Chronicle details outstanding events of each year, beginning with the reign of Nabopolassar. From this we can calculate that the Babylonians captured Jerusalem in 597 BC. We even know the exact date, the 2nd of Adar. This translates as either the 15th or 16th of March, 597 BC. But from this point until the final fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians, there is uncertainty. The Hebrew and Babylonian years start at different points. Thus, it is possible to count the 10 years between the 597 attack and the final destruction and end up just under a year out. Archaeologists and historians fight over this date almost as furiously as the Babylonian army. The end result is almost a matter of backing one scholar over another. Jerusalem finally fell to the Babylonians in either 587 or 586 BC, and that will do for now. It's another question that we need to look at again later. After the Babylonians, the quantity and quality of historical data improves. This is because the Greeks start to take an interest in the Persian Empire, and historians such as Herodotus and Thucydides give us plenty of useful material. Indeed, we have more secular than sacred history until we reach the New Testament. To summarise, in the Old Testament we have important events that cannot be dated with any degree of certainty. The creation, the flood, the call of Abraham, and so on. The fact that it is difficult to date these does not imply that they did not happen. The problem is that we no longer have the necessary historical data to calculate a date with any certainty. And in any case, what happened is far more important than when it happened. We can say with faith that if we needed to know these dates, we would have been given them. By the turn of the millennium, that's 1000 BC, the Hebrews were established in the Promised Land. The greatest king, David, reigned for 40 years, as did his son, Solomon. This coincidence of two 40-year reigns has led some to suggest that perhaps the scribes have been rounding the figures, or even that this number is symbolic and represents a generation. So saying that David and Solomon both reigned 40 years is not necessarily an accurate chronological record. Instead, it is a way of making it clear that they reigned a good long time, and reigned, in effect, a complete reign. It is speculative, but might be worth considering. We will look at this again later. After Solomon died, the kingdom divided. This took place in 931 or 930 BC. The northern kingdom of Israel, with Samaria as its capital, lasted until 722 BC. The southern kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital, lasted, as we have said, until 587 BC. If you can remember only two dates, make them these two. Fall of Samaria, 722, fall of Jerusalem, 587, both BC. In many ways, New Testament chronology is much easier. Everything in the New Testament, after the birth stories of the Baptist and of Jesus, took place in the 1st century. That's Anno Domini, of course. The sequence is also straightforward. Jesus was born. He grows up. All we know about his childhood after the nativity stories is one incident when he visited Jerusalem with his parents. It is in Luke 2. And then there is silence for about 25-30 years. Then Jesus starts his ministry, that leads after some 3 or so years to his death, burial and resurrection. The precise order of events within his ministry is not of great importance. No one will forfeit their salvation if they cannot remember if the Good Samaritan comes before or after the lost sheep. Of course, the death of Jesus has to come before his resurrection. That is only logical. And we know that it happened at Passover, but not which one. And after the ascension, the story continues in the book of Acts. And during the time covered by Acts, many of the New Testament letters were written, and the Gospels may well have been written down during the decades covered by Acts. And the entire New Testament may have been completed before the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the Temple in AD 70. Can we get some definite dates for the life of Jesus? Many scholars would say yes. Unfortunately, not all scholars agree on these dates. Where there are 2 or 3 scholars gathered together, there will be 4 or 5 opinions. Luke gives us a clear starting point in chapter 3, verse 1. in the 15th year of the Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, when Herod was prince of Galilee, his brother Philip of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias prince of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. This seems clear-cut. Unfortunately, there were several different calendars in use in New Testament times. Augustus Caesar died on the 19th of August, AD 14. His stepson Tiberius started his reign on the 1st of October in the year 14, that's according to the Syrian calendar, or on the 1st of Nisan, AD 15, in the Jewish calendar. Consequently, in Luke chapter 3, the 15th year could mean late 27 or early 28 in the Syrian calendar, or late 28, early 29 in the Jewish calendar. And in any case, this date is for the start of John's ministry. When did Jesus go to be baptized by him? We know that once Jesus had been baptized, he spent 40 days in the wilderness, probably to parallel the 40 years that Moses spent there. When it is significant, we are told. When it is unimportant, we are not told. So we get these annoying, or at least annoying for the historian, phrases such as after this or some time later, and we can only guess at how much time is meant. The crucifixion occurred at Passover, but which year? We know that Pilate was still procurator or governor, and we know that his posting ran from 26 to 36, so Jesus could not have died before 26 or after 36. And you can find a commentator to support pretty much each year of the 10. You will need to weigh up the evidence and decide for yourself. But always remember that what happened is far more important than when it happened. We have raised more questions than we have answered. But, as the proverb says, the longest journey starts with the first step. You will find satisfactory answers to many of these questions as you continue with your studies. And you will find that some of these questions are really not that important. To conclude, a quotation from J.M. Miller in Reading the Bible Historically, The Historian's Approach. The biblical writers were very conscious of history, and the Bible itself may be looked upon as largely historical in format and content. It is not history written for the sake of history, of course, and not history of the sort one would read in a modern history book. Nevertheless, the theological messages that the biblical writers sought to convey are so thoroughly intermeshed with their perceptions of history that it is difficult to separate one from the other.